The conference room smelled like burnt coffee and new carpet. That's the first thing I remember about the morning they announced it. Burnt coffee and new carpet, and 37 people staring at a slideshow like it was going to tell them something they didn't already know. I'd been running the Western accounts for 9 years. 9 years of flying out to Phoenix on Sunday nights so I could be in a client's office by 7 Monday morning. 9 years of knowing every regional manager by their kids' names, their golf handicaps, their allergies. My assistant director number was the one clients called when things went sideways, not the main line, not the help desk, my personal cell. So when my boss cleared his throat and said he had an exciting announcement about the new regional director of client services, I wasn't worried. I should have been. He said his nephew's name, Derek, and I felt the words land somewhere in my chest like something dropped from a height. I didn't move. I kept my face the way you keep your face when you're in a room full of people and you need 10 more seconds to process something before your expression betrays you. Derek had been with the company for 7 months. He'd spent 4 of those months in onboarding. I know because I was the one who answered his questions about the client portal. I know because he once emailed me to ask what CRM we used. The same CRM listed on his welcome packet. My boss was still talking. Something about fresh perspectives. Something about the next chapter. I nodded when people around me nodded. I picked up my coffee cup so I'd have something to do with my hands. That night, I drove home on the 405 and sat in traffic for an hour and 15 minutes and didn't turn on the radio once. I'd come to Meridian Solutions in my early 40s, which is not the easiest time to start over. My previous company had restructured, that word that means everything and nothing, and I'd spent 3 months in a kind of professional limbo that I don't like to think about too hard. My wife and I had just paid off the last of our kids' college tuition. We had a mortgage on a house in Thousand Oaks that we liked but didn't love, and a savings account that was doing fine until it suddenly needed to do more than fine. I interviewed at Meridian twice. My boss, his name was Richard, and for a long time I thought of him as a good man. Sat across from me in a glass-walled office and told me the company was growing. He said he needed someone with real experience, someone who could walk into a room of Fortune 500 procurement teams and hold the conversation for 2 hours without a safety net. He told me the role had a clear path to regional director. I took the job. I took a modest pay cut to take the job, which my wife supported because she said she could see I believed in it and she trusted my read on people. For 8.5 years, that read felt correct. I built the Western portfolio from 11 accounts to 34. I flew to Sacramento and Seattle and Denver and Tucson and Albuquerque. I learned which clients needed hand-holding and which ones needed to feel like equals and which ones just needed you to show up and not waste their time. I mentored 2 junior reps who both got promoted. One of them sent me a bottle of bourbon when he made senior associate, with a card that said I wouldn't be here without you, and I put the card in my desk drawer and kept it there. Richard gave me good reviews. Every cycle, he'd sit across from me and go through the rubric and check the boxes and tell me I was the backbone of the Western Division. He used that word, backbone, enough times that I started to believe it was how he saw me. I think now that backbone was exactly how he saw me. Something load-bearing that you don't think about until you need it. Derek showed up in April of last year. He was 26. I know because someone mentioned his birthday in the break room and people made a fuss and there was a cake from Whole Foods. He was tall and easy with people in the way that some men are when they've never had a reason not to be. He wore good clothes. He asked questions in meetings that were smart enough to sound engaged but vague enough that no one could pin him down on anything. Richard introduced him to me personally, which in retrospect meant something. He said Derek was going to be doing a rotational period across departments, getting a feel for the whole operation. He asked if I'd take Derek under my wing for his first few weeks in client services. I said of course. I walked Derek through everything. The account histories, the relationship maps I'd built for each client, the internal quirks of our CRM, the unwritten rules about who to call when escalations hit certain thresholds. He was a decent listener. He took notes on his phone. He asked follow-up questions that showed he'd actually processed what I'd said. By the time he rotated to another department 6 weeks later, I thought, this kid might actually be okay. I didn't think about him much after that. Q3 was busy. I was closing a renewal with a distribution client in Nevada that had been rocky since their procurement team turned over, and I was also managing a new account in Orange County that needed more attention than it was worth. I was traveling almost every week. I was tired in the way that you're tired at a certain point in your career where you're good at pushing through it, and that becomes its own problem. When Derek started appearing in the client services meetings again in September, I noticed but didn't flag it. Richard said he was doing a second rotation. More exposure. That made sense to me. I'd seen other rotational associates do extended stints in the department. What didn't make sense was the October strategy session where Derek sat at the head of the table and presented a revised account prioritization framework, not as a proposal, as a rollout. I looked at Richard across the table. Richard was looking at the slides. After the meeting, I caught Richard in the hallway and asked plainly what Derek's new role was. Richard said they were formalizing some things and he'd get me details soon. He put his hand on my shoulder when he said it. I went back to my office and sat at my desk and looked at my calendar. I had a client call in 40 minutes. I took the call. I was professional. I kept everything running the way I always kept everything running, which was, I understood now, part of the problem. The announcement came in November. Regional Director of Client Services. Derek's name. A smattering of applause in a conference room that smelled like burnt coffee and new carpet. Richard shook Derek's hand. Derek smiled the easy smile of someone who doesn't know yet what the job actually requires. I clapped twice, maybe 3 times. I don't remember. What I remember is walking back to my office and closing the door, which I almost never did, and sitting at my desk and looking at the stack of client files I'd organized the week before. 34 accounts, 9 years, a personal cell number that clients called because they trusted me, not the company, me. I didn't make a scene, that's not who I am. I didn't storm into Richard's office or fire off an email or say something I couldn't take back. I sat in my chair and I thought about a conversation I'd had with my wife the previous spring when she'd asked me, gently, whether Meridian was still the right place for me, whether I was happy. I'd said yes without thinking too hard about it. I thought about my answer now. I gave myself 2 weeks, not out of obligation. I was past feeling obligated, but because I had 3 client calls scheduled that I didn't want to leave dangling, and because I needed time to do something I should have started sooner. I updated my resume. I reached out, quietly and carefully, to a few people in my network I'd kept warm over the years. One was a VP of sales at a competitor in the mid-market space. Another was a former Meridian client who'd moved to a logistics firm in Dallas and had mentioned offhandedly twice that they were building out their account management team. I also documented everything, not in a paranoid way, in a precise way. The accounts I'd built, the revenue I'd retained and grown, the client relationships that existed because of my work specifically, not the company's name, numbers I could point to, names I could use as references. I learned this lesson in my 30s, and I should have kept it fresher. Your value is yours, not theirs. Never store it only in their system. During those 2 weeks, I did my job the same way I always did it. I took calls, I sent follow-ups, I mentored one of my junior reps through a difficult renewal conversation. I did not give Derek the cold shoulder in the hallway because that would have been small, and I am not interested in being small. On my last day, I closed my computer, put a few personal items in a bag, and left a handover document on my desk that I'd spent 4 hours making as thorough as possible. Not for Richard, for my clients and my colleagues who deserved better than chaos. I told my assistant I was leaving. She hugged me. She said she'd be surprised if she was still there in 6 months. I walked to my car. I sat in it for a minute in the parking garage. Then I drove to a diner on the way home and ordered eggs and coffee and sat by the window and felt, underneath everything, something that took me a while to name: relief. The first month was disorienting in a way I hadn't anticipated. I'd been in motion for so long that stillness felt like something had gone wrong. I woke up early, out of habit. I'd reach for my phone to check email and then remember. My wife was steady. That's the word for her. She's always been the steady one. She said, take the month. She said we had enough runway. She said she'd watched me come home tired for 3 years straight and maybe this was the push we both needed. I took some of the money, but I also made calls. The VP of sales I'd reached out to, his name was Marcus, and I'd known him peripherally for years through industry events, came back quickly. He said they were actually about to post a senior director role, Western region, and that he'd wanted to call me for 6 months but hadn't known I was looking. He said that in this industry, my name meant something. I've heard that kind of thing said to people and dismissed it as flattery. He said it in a way that wasn't flattery. He said it in the way that someone says a practical fact. We met for lunch 3 weeks after I left Meridian. The role was better than what I'd had. Better title, better compensation structure, better equity in the accounts I brought in. There was a 30-day waiting period before I could discuss former client relationships, which I respected and observed. On day 31, I made some calls. I want to be clear, I did not poach. I contacted people who I had built genuine relationships with over nearly a decade, and I told them, professionally and honestly, where I'd landed and why. I told them I was excited about the new company's direction. I did not say a word about Meridian or Derek or Richard. I didn't need to. These were smart people who understood the industry and could draw their own conclusions. 3 accounts requested formal transition meetings within 60 days. Richard called me in February. I almost didn't pick up. I'm glad I did because the call was short and it told me everything I needed to understand about how the previous 9 years had actually looked from his side. He said he was reaching out because some of the Western accounts had raised concerns during their quarterly check-ins. He said the transition had been, he paused here, more complex than anticipated. He said he wanted to pick my brain. I listened. I was polite. I said I appreciated him reaching out, but that I was fully engaged in my new role and wasn't in a position to consult. I wished him well. I meant it, or most of it. What I didn't say, that more complex than anticipated, is what happens when you replace 9 years of specific, hard-won relationships with a 26-year-old who learned the CRM name from me personally. After I hung up, I sat in my new office, smaller than the old one, better view, and thought about what backbone means. It means you hold things up and nobody thinks about you until the weight shifts. It means when you leave, you take the load with you. The conversation I wasn't expecting came from my son. He's 24, studying business at Cal State. We've had a complicated few years. Not broken, but complicated. In the way that fathers and sons get complicated when the son is figuring out who he is and the father is too busy to slow down enough to help. We talk regularly now, which is better than we did when I was traveling every week. He called me on a Thursday night in March. He said he'd heard through a former classmate about a summer associate program at my new company. He asked if there was a right way to apply or if he should just go through the regular portal. I told him to go through the regular portal. He laughed. He said he expected me to say that. I said I could tell him honestly about the culture and the team, what they were actually like versus how they marketed themselves, and he could make up his own mind about whether it was a good fit. I said I wasn't going to get him anything. I said I'd spent a career watching what happens when someone gets something they didn't earn, and I wasn't interested in being part of that story. He went quiet for a second. Then he said, "I know, Dad. That's not what I'm asking for. I'm asking because I've watched how you handle your career and it's how I want to handle mine." I didn't have anything ready for that. I said I was glad to hear it. I probably didn't say it as well as I could have. He applied. He got a first-round interview on his own. He called me after to debrief and I listened and gave him feedback the way I'd give it to any junior associate, honestly, without padding. He made it to round 2. Whatever happens from there is his. Here's what I know now that I didn't let myself know clearly enough then. Richard was always going to promote Derek. Not because Derek was ready, not because Derek was qualified. Because Derek was qualified, because Derek was family, and in a family business, even one that calls itself a professional enterprise with mission statements and org charts, family comes first. That's not a cynical reading. That's just the math. The mistake I made wasn't staying 8.5 years. My work was real, and so were those relationships. The mistake was believing that, because the work was real, the reward would follow automatically. That's not how it works. I knew that. I'd known it in the abstract for years. I just hadn't applied it to myself. The day Derek sat at the head of that table presenting a framework that no one had told me was coming. That was the day I should have started moving. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. Spite is expensive, and it weighs you down. Clarity is just seeing the thing for what it is. A colleague told me once, "Don't fight with noise, fight with output." He meant it about client negotiations, but it applies to most things. I didn't argue with Richard. I didn't send the angry email. I didn't make the scene that would have felt satisfying for about 40 seconds and followed me for years. I just took my work and went somewhere it was valued. The 3 accounts that followed me made a quiet kind of argument that I never had to put into words. My wife and I went to dinner on our anniversary in April. The same restaurant we'd gone to 5 years before, when I'd gotten a strong review at Meridian, and we'd celebrated with a bottle of wine we couldn't quite justify. We ordered the same bottle. She asked how I felt. I thought about it, actually. I didn't give the reflexive answer. I said I felt like myself in a way I hadn't in a few years. I said I hadn't realized how much of my energy had been going into performing loyalty to a place that was never going to fully see me. I said I was sleeping better. She said she knew. She said she'd been watching me sleep better for 2 months and had been waiting for me to notice. That's what 9 years of the wrong kind of staying costs you. Not just the title and the comp. It cost you the energy you didn't know you were hemorrhaging until it stopped. Some things you can only see clearly once they're behind you. I'm not angry at Richard. I'm not angry at Derek, who is doing a job he wasn't ready for and will either grow into it or won't. I'm not angry at the company, which is a company and will do what companies do. I'm just no longer in the room where any of it matters. That morning in the conference room, the burnt coffee, the new carpet, the applause I gave because I was still, even then, a professional. That was the last morning I spent my energy somewhere it would never compound. Everything since then has been mine. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since that November morning. Not in a dramatic way. Just the quiet, practical way you think about things when the noise has settled and you can finally see the sequence clearly. Richard made a choice. He promoted Derek because Derek was his nephew. And when you own something, family feels like the safest place to put your trust. I understand that logic. I don't agree with it, but I understand it. What Richard didn't account for is that trust, in business, isn't transferred by title. It's built over time, call by call, problem by problem, showing up when things go sideways. You can hand someone a nameplate. You can't hand them 9 years. That's not a moral judgment. That's just how it works. What I did after. Leaving, documenting my work, reaching out to my network, observing the 30-day period before I made a single client call. That sequence mattered. Not because I planned some elaborate exit strategy, but because the way you leave a place tends to reflect the same habits that built your reputation there. I left the same way I worked, without noise, without shortcuts, without burning anything I didn't have to burn. And the accounts that followed me didn't follow me because I asked them to. They followed me because 9 years of consistent, honest work had made the decision easy for them. That's what I mean when I say everything compounds. The effort you put in, the integrity you maintain when no one's watching, the calls you take on Sunday night because a client is stressed. None of that disappears when you walk out a door. It travels with you. It's yours. I think about my son asking to apply to my new company. He wasn't asking for a handout. He was asking how to do it right. That question, how to do it right, is the only one worth spending your career trying to answer. Not how to get ahead fastest. Not how to position yourself for the next announcement. How to do the actual work. Consistently. In a way that makes you someone people trust. Derek will figure out, or he won't, that the title doesn't teach you the job. The job teaches you the job. And if the people around you aren't invested in that learning, if they got where they are through a relationship rather than through the work, they'll eventually find the gap between the role and their actual capability. That's not cruelty. That's just gravity. I'm not who I was 9 years ago when I took a pay cut to join Meridian because I believed in the direction. I'm also not who I was in November, sitting in my car in the parking garage trying to name what I was feeling. I'm somewhere on the other side of both of those moments, in a job that fits what I've actually built. in an office with a better view, sleeping through the night. The work you do in good faith, even in a place that ultimately won't honor it, is never wasted. It sharpens you. It teaches you what you're capable of. And when the moment comes where you need to rely on it, it's there. Everything I built at Meridian came with me. Everything that mattered, anyway.